A plane takes off into the Cuban night. On board, the second most powerful man of the revolution. Destination, Havana. He never arrived. His body was never recovered. This is the story of Che's closest friend who vanished without a trace. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers and motivate us to bring you even more historical content about the darkest secrets of the Cuban Revolution. October 28, 1959. Camagüey, Cuba. A Cessna 310 prepares for takeoff. The weather is perfectly clear. On board, Commander Camilo Cienfuegos Gorriarán, hero of the revolution, right-hand man to Fidel Castro, brother-in-arms to Che Guevara. Camilo was only 27 years old. He was considered the second most important man in Cuba after Fidel. His popularity rivaled that of Castro himself. His smile won over crowds. His black beard and Stetson hat made him unmistakable across the entire island. But that night, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft sent a routine report 1 hour after takeoff at 6 in the evening. After that, absolute silence. Nothing more was heard. Commander Cienfuegos had vanished into thin air. To understand this mystery, we must go back. Who was Camilo Cienfuegos really? Son of Spanish anarchists, he was born in Havana on February 6, 1932, into a working-class family. His father was a tailor and left-wing political activist. From a young age, Camilo got involved in student demonstrations against Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship. In December 1955, he participated in protests that were violently suppressed. He and his companions were shot at by police while marching peacefully. In 1956, Camilo traveled to Mexico where he met Fidel Castro and joined the 26th of July movement. He would be one of the 82 men who boarded the yacht Granma heading to Cuba to launch the revolution. Most wouldn't survive the landing. On December 2, 1956, the Granma reached Cuba. 3 days later, they were ambushed in a sugarcane field. Many guerrillas were captured and executed. The survivors fled to the Sierra Maestra mountains. Only 12 men remained with Fidel. Camilo was one of them. In the Sierra Maestra, something happened that would change Cuba's history. Camilo Cienfuegos met Ernesto Che Guevara. The encounter nearly ended in tragedy. During an ambush, Camilo almost shot Che, who was disguised as an officer from Batista's army. Despite that accidental beginning, Camilo and Che became brothers in arms. Their personalities were opposite but complementary. Che was austere, disciplined, severe. Camilo was cheerful, spontaneous, charismatic. Together they formed an unbeatable team. Camilo was assigned as captain of Che's advance platoon. Witnesses from that era recall Camilo's carefree personality helped offset Che's severity. The two became inseparable in the Las Villas guerrilla campaign. In July 1957, during an attack at Pino del Agua, Camilo was wounded twice while attempting to recover a machine gun. Che ordered a retreat because they couldn't continue without the wounded Camilo. This shows how indispensable he was to revolutionary operations. While Camilo recovered, Che wrote him letters. In one of them, Camilo replied, "Che, brother of my soul, I'd like to always be by your side. You were my chief for a long time and you'll always remain so. Your eternal sidekick, Camilo." In August 1958, Fidel sent Che and Camilo on a crucial mission, the march to the west. They had to cross all of Cuba on foot, traversing swamps and rice paddies, avoiding aerial bombardments. 40 days of hellish marching. For 31 days they ate only 11 times. Camilo reported, "We marched with water and mud up to our knees, traveling at night to avoid ambushes. After 4 days of starvation, we had to eat a mare. Nearly all our animals got stuck in the swamp." It was hell, but they pushed forward. Che and Camilo arrived in Las Villas in October 1958. There, Camilo organized collective reading sessions, reading aloud the works of José Martí and Antonio Machado. His deep voice captivated the fighters, inspiring them for the final battle. In December 1958, Camilo led the attack on the army barracks at Yaguajay. The Battle of Yaguajay was fierce. Camilo's column captured 250 men and 375 rifles. This victory was the death blow to Batista's dictatorship. On January 2nd, 1959, Camilo and Che marched on Havana. Camilo arrived first and occupied Camp Colombia, the military headquarters. When Carlos Franqui arrived, he described the scene. Camilo, with his romantic beard, looked like Christ on a spree, with his boots on the floor and his feet on the desk. The revolution had triumphed. Camilo became chief of the Revolutionary Armed Forces. He was only 27 years old. American Ambassador Philip Bonzel described him as cheerful and communicative. He enjoyed nightlife, fun. He didn't have an irresistible drive to wield power. But the revolutionary honeymoon soon ended. Fidel Castro began consolidating his power in an authoritarian manner. Cienfuegos complained, "This Fidel really likes to screw around." Tensions were beginning to surface in the revolutionary leadership. In the first months after the revolutionary triumph, Che didn't yet have official positions and enjoyed Havana's nightlife, the clubs, and his fame as the darling of the masses. When he married Aleida March on June 2nd, 1959, Camilo brought rum to liven up the party. But something dark was brewing. Fidel began purging officers from the old army, replacing them with guerrillas loyal only to him. Camilo, who originally envisioned an equitable merger of both armies, was convinced by Fidel that it was necessary to reorganize with men loyal to the revolution. In October 1959, the incident occurred that would seal Camilo's fate. Raúl Castro was promoted to Minister of the Armed Forces, formally demoting Camilo, who had been his superior. This triggered a political crisis. Commander Huber Matos, provincial leader of Camagüey, resigned in protest. He accused Fidel Castro of burying the revolution by turning it communist. Matos had shared his concerns with Camilo, who promised to investigate the situation. Camilo was trapped between his loyalty to Fidel and his own doubts. Fidel publicly denounced Matos for treason. Camilo, along with Che and President Dorticos, felt that Fidel's denunciations were a mistake. They tried to persuade Fidel to show leniency, but Fidel wouldn't listen. Raúl Castro ordered Camilo to arrest Matos. Camilo initially refused. He only accepted when Fidel personally ordered him to. It was the first time Camilo questioned an order from Fidel. Some say this was his death sentence. Camilo flew to Camagüey. He found that Matos's forces remained loyal to their commander. Matos ordered his officers to treat Camilo with respect to make clear there was no conspiracy. But the officers resigned en masse in protest. Camilo arrested Matos without resistance. He refused to handcuff him, walking side by side with him in front of the press. It was a gesture of respect between comrades in arms. Matos was taken to Havana. Camilo remained in Camagüey to reorganize the provincial armed forces. And then came October 28, 1959, the day that would change Cuba's history forever. Camilo boarded a Cessna 310 in Camagüey, bound for Havana. The plane's pilot was inexperienced, but the weather was completely clear, perfect for flying. At 6 in the evening, the aircraft took off. An hour later, they sent a routine report to the base. Everything was normal. And then, silence. The plane simply disappeared. There were no emergency calls, no distress signals, only emptiness. News of his disappearance wasn't reported until October 30th, 2 days later. When Raúl Castro informed the cabinet, Fidel appeared surprised and visibly shaken. The government quickly ordered a search and rescue operation. Throughout the country, Catholics organized massive processions in honor of Cienfuegos. The political leadership widely publicized their concern for their lost comrade. The military followed every lead, speaking with peasants who claimed to have seen a plane crash. They even consulted a spiritualist. American Ambassador Philip Bonzel offered American planes to cooperate in the search. But curiously, the Cuban government assigned them to a location where the plane was unlikely to have been. Castro never mentioned the American assistance in his report. Why? For publicity, Castro was filmed searching for Cienfuegos with his parents, who posed for photos looking up at the sky for their lost son. But some who accompanied Castro on those search flights claimed he never seemed emotionally invested. He appeared indifferent to Camilo's fate. Meanwhile, something even more sinister occurred. Major Cristobal Naranjo, Cienfuegos' former assistant, began investigating the disappearance on his own. Shortly after, Naranjo was murdered by Captain Manuel Beaton, apparently during a drunken argument. Beaton had been passed over for a promotion. After killing Naranjo, he escaped to the Sierra Maestra and became an outlaw. The following year, Beaton was killed. Many suspected these murders were connected to Cienfuegos' disappearance. Too many coincidences. On November 5th, it was falsely reported that Cienfuegos had been found. Work stopped throughout the country. People poured into the streets to celebrate. Merchants had to close their stores because employees abandoned them. Journalist Ruby Hart Phillips wrote, "I was surprised to learn that Major Cienfuegos was so popular." Many Catholics attributed the miracle to the Virgin of Charity or St. Jude Thaddeus. But hours later, the Revolutionary Armed Forces denied its validity. They claimed it was counter-revolutionary propaganda designed to assassinate Castro. A strange and contradictory explanation. The Cuban government declared Camilo Cienfuegos officially dead. His body was never discovered. No trace of the plane was ever found. The official story was never proven or refuted. 66 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. Theories immediately began circulating. Cienfuegos' plane's pilot was inexperienced. The government claimed the aircraft was brought down by a storm. But the weather that day was clear, perfect for flying. The area his plane was flying over was covered by radar. How could it simply disappear? Roberto de Cardenas, captain of the base from which Cienfuegos took off, made an explosive accusation. The flight's fate had been planned. He claimed no one saw Cienfuegos board the plane and that others at the base were murdered or subdued. The first theory, Raúl Castro murdered Cienfuegos out of jealousy. Raúl was always in the shadow of his brother Fidel. But Camilo was also immensely popular, perhaps more than Raúl himself. Huber Matos was convinced that his arrest and Camilo's disappearance were connected. Some people believed that Carlos Franchi suspected intelligence agent Osvaldo Sanchez, who had been charged by Raúl Castro with ensuring Cienfuegos' safety. Was Sanchez responsible? Did he act under Raúl's orders? There's no concrete evidence. The second theory is even darker. Fidel Castro himself ordered Cienfuegos' assassination. Critics speculated it had to do with Camilo's apparent reluctance to arrest Matos. Or perhaps Cienfuegos was becoming too popular for Castro's taste. Some critics claim that one of Fidel's specialties is sending people to get killed. José Pardo Llada, who was with Castro during the search for Cienfuegos, said years later, "He may not have killed Camilo, but he certainly didn't mourn his death." However, Che Guevara never suspected the Castros were involved in Cienfuegos' disappearance. He remained personally loyal to Fidel for years afterward. Ambassador Philip Bonsal also didn't consider there was foul play by the Castros, believing that Cienfuegos wasn't a threat to anyone. Other theories emerged. One speculated that his plane was mistaken for a hostile aircraft and shot down by a Cuban Air Force pilot by mistake. Friendly fire that the government had to cover up to avoid scandal. The strangest theory, Cienfuegos faked his death and fled to the United States. According to some people, he would have escaped to Ybor City in Tampa, Florida. In 1960, a former Havana nurse who had fled to Miami claimed to have cared for Cienfuegos, but she was declared insane. Some people believe that Cienfuegos and 3 other Cubans flew their plane from Camagüey to an abandoned World War II airstrip on Cayo Largo, a small island near Cuba. From there, they supposedly escaped to Tampa. Too embarrassed to admit a revolutionary leader fled, Castro faked his death. This theory had some logic. Cuba was becoming communist. Cienfuegos had said the revolution was Cuban to the extreme, as Cuban as palm trees, uniquely and exclusively Cuban. Not communist. Would he have fled out of fear of what Cuba was becoming? Ybor City in Tampa could have been a friendly refuge. Its Cuban population had played a role in the revolution, sending money, food, medical supplies, and weapons to Castro's troops. But when Cuba embraced communism, many turned against the revolution. However, historians seem to agree that Camilo's death was more likely an accident, not the result of foul play. On November 9th, Juan Vieras, who flew for the Francisco Sugar Co., and had given flight instruction to Cienfuegos' plane's pilot, was arrested. But doubts persist. Why was the weather clear but the government claimed it was a storm? Why didn't the radar detect anything? Why did Castro assign the American planes to wrong areas during the search? Why was Naranjo murdered while investigating? British historian Hugh Thomas speculated whether the mystery of Cienfuegos' disappearance would ever be solved. More than 6 decades later, it still isn't. The Cuban government maintains its official story. It was an accident. But many don't believe it. What's undeniable is what happened after Camilo's disappearance. While Huber Matos received a show trial by a revolutionary tribunal, Cienfuegos was turned into a revolutionary martyr. Fidel Castro accelerated his consolidation of total power. Castro used Camilo's death as justification to convince Cubans of the need to defend the revolution at all costs. This meant the end of judicial independence and the re-establishment of revolutionary tribunals. The category of political prisoner was eliminated. When Prensa Libre reported on allegations of growing tensions between the Castros and Cienfuegos before his disappearance, the Castros began campaigning against press freedom. Newspapers were censored or shut down. Critical voices silenced. Camilo's brother, Osmani Cienfuegos, was appointed shortly after Camilo's death as Minister of Public Works. He served until 1966, when he was named president of the Communist Party's Foreign Relations Commission. Some saw this as Fidel's compensation for Camilo's loss. Che Guevara named his son Camilo in honor of Cienfuegos. He kept a photograph of him on the wall of his study after leaving Cuba. In 1961, he dedicated his book, Guerrilla Warfare, to Cienfuegos, whose photo adorned the cover. Che wrote about Camilo. Few men have managed to leave such a distinctive personal mark on every action. He had the natural intelligence of the people. Camilo practiced loyalty like a religion. He was a pure revolutionary soul. Cienfuegos is honored on Cuban coins, stamps, and bills. His image appears on the 20-peso note. Every year, on October 28th, Cuban schoolchildren throw flowers into rivers and seas in his honor, a tribute to a fallen hero or to a man silenced by power. His image adorns numerous monuments throughout Cuba, but what he represents remains a subject of debate. For the government, a martyr loyal to the revolution. For critics, a victim of the Castro's paranoia and thirst for power. Cuban-American historian Samuel Farber described Cienfuegos as the epitome of the masculine urban native Cuban, with his sense of humor, great interest in dancing and baseball, good looks, love for women, and a general joie de vivre. He wasn't an ideologue, he was a man of the people. This was perhaps his greatest threat to the Castros. Cienfuegos wasn't a convinced communist like Che. He wasn't a relentless ideologue like Raúl. He was simply loved by the people. And in a dictatorship, genuine popularity is more dangerous than any weapon. Some researchers point out that CIA files, now declassified, which tracked Che's movements from 1965, are relatively silent regarding details of Cienfuegos' disappearance. What did the CIA know about Cienfuegos' disappearance in 1959? Did they have information that was never revealed? The declassified documents don't mention it, which is strange considering he was Cuba's second most powerful man at that moment. In 1967, when Che was captured and executed in Bolivia, his remains were hidden for 30 years. In 1997, Cuba launched a forensic expedition to locate them. It took 600 days to find them and repatriate them to Cuba. Why was the same never done for Cienfuegos? On July 12, 1997, Che's remains arrived in Cuba. Fidel Castro presided over the solemn ceremony. His daughter Aleida expressed, "Today their mortal remains come to us, but they don't arrive defeated. They come transformed into heroes, eternally young, brave, strong, and bold." But for Camilo, there was no search expedition decades later. No repatriation of remains, no closure. Only the Cuban government's silence and the mystery that deepens with each passing year. Why the difference in treatment between Che and Camilo? Some people believe the answer is simple. Che was killed by enemies of the revolution, making him a perfect martyr. But if Camilo was killed by the revolution itself, his body could never be found. It would be proof of a crime Cuba could never admit. Camilo Cienfuegos' case raises broader questions about the nature of revolutions. How many other revolutionary leaders in history have been quietly eliminated by their own comrades? How many mysterious disappearances were actually covered-up political murders? The French Revolution devoured many of its own children. Danton, Desmoulins, finally Robespierre. The Russian Revolution executed or exiled nearly all the original Bolsheviks. Revolutions, it seems, have an insatiable appetite for the blood of their own creators. Was Camilo Cienfuegos another victim of this historical pattern? Or was it genuinely an accident, a tragedy with no conspiracy behind it? The truth may be buried in the Cuban government's secret archives, waiting for the day they're opened. Meanwhile, the mystery of Camilo Cienfuegos remains as one of the great unsolved enigmas of the 20th century. A man who helped overthrow a dictatorship, only to possibly become a victim of the new one. A revolutionary hero whose ending nobody truly knows. His legacy is complex. For some, he represents the pure ideals of the revolution before it became corrupted. For others, he's a reminder that even the most beloved heroes can be erased when they become inconvenient to power. The last image many have of Camilo is of the young, smiling commander, with his characteristic Stetson hat and black beard, releasing birds from their cages at Camp Columbia and declaring, "These also have the right to freedom." A cruel irony if his own freedom was taken away. 66 years after his disappearance, there's no body, no official grave, no definitive answers. only the flowers that Cuban children throw into the sea every October 28th, a tribute to a man whose final fate remains a mystery. Will we ever know the truth about what happened to Camilo Cienfuegos? Perhaps when the Cuban regime finally falls, the secret archives will be opened and reveal what really occurred that October night in 1959. Or perhaps the secret died with those who knew it. What we do know is that Camilo Cienfuegos was one of the most important men of the Cuban Revolution. He was Che Guevara's closest friend. He was loved by the people. And one day he simply disappeared, leaving a void in history that has never been filled. This is the unsolved mystery of Che's missing commander. A story of revolution, loyalty, power, and silence. If you know more information about this case or have your own theories, share them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more dark stories of the Cuban Revolution.